Red 2 standing by, all 4 lit and in the green. Welcome back to Goldeneye. We are heading into the surface for the second time, another mission in 7-Eye where we never actually were. This is essentially allowing us to have a better understanding of what happens with the Goldeneye satellite. Basically, this is the mission where it gets stolen, and the theft is covered up. So we will be meeting Natalia, and we will be going across the surface of the snows in Siberia. This time, things are actually a little bit tougher for us, because the most common weapon is the worst in the game. The club. The club is actually pretty good at dealing with some groups of enemies sometimes, but you're probably better off using the silenced PP7. I'll have to try and remember where everything is, because you get an interesting cheat from doing this on 00 Agent. Anyway, I don't really have much news as far as, well, the connection to the movie goes, which I'm trying to focus on a little bit, but we shall get there. So on Agent, we just have to break the communications link to the bunker and gain entry. The pirate helicopter was tracked to 7-Eye, where a Keyhole 1 electronic intelligence (ELINT) satellite recorded a brief firefight. After the pirate left, the same satellite observed a troop helicopter being made ready at a Spetsnaz camp, 200 miles due south. The only way that we can get you there quickly is to drop you from a spy plane, and the Soviet Special Forces will be there before you. You should remember this place, 007. We need any evidence of Yanis's presence there, and fast. Disable the troop helicopter so that nothing can be removed from the scene, and destroy their surveillance cameras. This had to be an inside job, Bond. Find out who their contact was. The macabre way to do it would be to use their casualty list. Of course, you'd have to know who was there first. Right, I've altered a standard mine to take a 10-second fuse. There's only one, so don't play around with it. That should take care of their helicopter. This is a covert op, so I fitted a silencer to your pistol. Satisfied? No? Well, tough, that's all you're getting. Remember the saying, James? Never go back? Let's see how lucky we are. Just as James Bond changes in the movies, so too do his allies. Some of the actors who played Bond's allies stayed in their roles for many, many years, while other characters had changed appearance every time. While the faces can be different depending on the era, the roles are largely the same. Various people playing a small but significant role in the films, assisting Bond however possible, or just providing a reassuring presence. We will get to the allies in the individual films in a later episode, but this lesson focuses on James Bond's recurring allies and a little bit about the actors who played the roles, if possible. The M of Ian Fleming's novels is frequently described as irascible, a gruff and conservative man with a Victorian soul who has served his country for many years in the Royal Navy. He pays homage to this with various paintings depicting great British naval victories. He is an authoritative figure first and foremost, occasionally showing glimpses of humanity beneath the steely exterior. Bernard Lee's M, on the other hand, does not offer us glimpses of his social life as Fleming's M does in Moonraker, but in exchange he is more human and far less grouchy, even if he can be rather curt and blunt on occasions. Already a well-established actor, having taken a number of roles with authoritative elements in film and television, Bernard Lee was born in early 1908, with some dispute existing over whether he was born in County Cork in Ireland or in Brentford in England. He attended the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, working as a fruit porter to pay his fees, and established his film career prior to serving with the Royal Sussex Regiment during World War II. He would resume his film career and establish himself in stage after the war, gaining the reputation for playing authority figures. M would become his best remembered role. Lee's M was acknowledged by many as being the embodiment of Fleming's M, using his experience playing those authority figures to show a rigid, stern and commanding presence. However, he comes across as less grouchy compared to Fleming's M, and is more willing to speak up in favour of 007. Thunderball is a perfect example. While he admonishes Bond for turning up late to the 00 section's meeting regarding Spectre's blackmail message, and is determined to make sure he's in the best shape possible by sending him off to Shrublands, he acknowledges the leads Bond has found while at Shrublands during the discussion of Bond's individual assignment. When Bond's RAF liaison, Group Captain Pritchard, questions Bond's discoveries regarding the murdered NATO pilot Francois Duval, M shuts Pritchard down by pointing out Bond's word is enough for him to order an inquiry. M may demand Bond's best and will pull him back in line when he does something unusual or out of line, but he trusts and respects him enough to know that 007 will come through every time, and he usually finds something important to ensure the mission can be completed on top of that. Lee's last appearance as M shows this nicely. Hugo Drax has managed to pull an impressive switcheroo, which has left M and Defence Minister Sir Frederick Grey utterly humiliated, but when Bond reveals the vial of nerve gas he stole from the mysteriously vanished lab, M gives Bond leave to pursue his leads and finish the job bringing down Drax. It's also revealed the two had a very interesting time in Tokyo once. Exactly what happened is never revealed. We also do find out, as far as personal life goes, that M is into lepidoptery as opposed to painting in the books. Amusingly enough, Bond actually knows just as much about this as M does. Lee's personal life was somewhat difficult through the 1970s, turning to drink after the death of his wife in a house fire in 1972. While he did eventually clean himself up, there were still occasional problems with alcohol as recounted by Roger Moore in his autobiography. Lee would ultimately pass away 6 days after his 73rd birthday, having been suffering from stomach cancer. Filming had begun on For Your Eyes Only, but M's scenes had not been filmed. No replacement was found, and M was mentioned as being on leave. In Octopussy, Robert Brown took over the role as M. Several fans suspect this M is a promoted Admiral Hargreaves, Brown's character from The Spy Who Loved Me. We can only guess, as Bernard Lee's M was Sir Miles Messervy, and as far as the films go, that character seems to have died with him. The role wasn't recast in For Your Eyes Only out of respect. Robert Brown had a fairly large film and television resume prior to becoming M. In fact, one of his recurring roles was playing Girth, an assistant to Ivanhoe in the eponymous TV series which starred Roger Moore. In fact, Moore was the one who recommended Brown for the role of M, and he officially took over the duties in Octopussy. While Brown's M does not quite have the same rapport with Bond as Lee's did, there is still a good level of respect between them. However, the relationship seems to have fractured considerably in License to Kill, where M seems rather uncaring about the fate of Felix and Della Leiter. He also neglects to provide Bond with important information about operations currently being undertaken within Sanchez's organisation, among other flaws. While M does have a point that Bond's reckless actions could jeopardise MI6 and would probably screw up the missions to bring down Sanchez on top of that, he does come across as rather uncaring and obstructive because he never makes things clear. This M is generally the least regarded of the series, but we do get to see, in No Time to Die, that there is a painting of him in M's office. Judi Dench is in the interesting position of playing two different M's. It has been confirmed that her M from the Brosnan films is not the same as the one in Daniel Craig's films. In the Brosnan era, her M is named Barbara Maudsley. In the Craig era, Olivia Mansfield. Nonetheless, Judi Dench's presence in the role has been quite a standout for many newer fans. She has an excellent resume from years of theatre and cinema work. Dench was born in 1934 and established herself as a noted Shakespearean actor with the Old Vic Theatre Company. She set herself up in the late 1950s, taking roles such as Juliet and Lady Macbeth, the former in a production directed by Franco Zeffirelli. In the late 1960s, she would earn a BAFTA for Most Promising Newcomer in leading film roles, and proved a capable singer as Sally Bowles in a production of Cabaret. She continued to act primarily in the theatre, not yet earning starring roles in films, but proving able to lead in television. Her work in As Time Goes By actually makes certain scenes in Tomorrow Never Dies unintentionally funny in a few ways. Since she's acting alongside Jeffrey Palmer, her co-star from As Time Goes By, meaning M's clashes with Admiral Roebuck are effectively an upgraded version of Lionel and Jean having an argument. Since taking the role as M, her film career has been very well established, and honestly, seriously, take the time to read it. I could be here all day. Read up on her film career, it's impressive. While she can be every bit as gruff and blunt as Bernard-Lee's M or even Fleming's. Regardless of which M she is, Judi Dench is willing to trust Bond and ultimately forms fairly good relationships with the different incarnations of 007 she works with. She is certainly not perfect, given both her incarnations of M have some dark secrets in their past, but Bond remains loyal and helps out where he can. In the case of Maudsley, it is the mishandling of Electra King's kidnapping and advising Sir Robert King not to pay the ransom. A decision she came to regret, and one which would return to haunt her when King is killed during an attack on MI6 early in The World Is Not Enough. She is also captured by Renard, but is able to engineer an impromptu GPS setup which allows Bond to find and rescue her before he kills Electra. In Mansfield's case, it is the story surrounding Tiago Rodriguez, now known as Raul Silva. She exchanged Rodriguez for several prisoners when it was found he was launching unsanctioned cyber attacks on China, and while she considers she did the right thing, a key trait throughout Olivia Mansfield's time as M is that she will always put duty first, despite the trust she shows in her agents. Silva's obsession with avenging his betrayal, mixed with what comes across as a malevolent Oedipus complex, triggers a series of disasters which threaten MI6. Despite all this, she is still a parental substitute to Craig's Bond, having mentioned that orphans make the best recruits. She will quickly and bluntly pull Bond up if he steps out of line, and she has an excellent "do not mess with me" voice, but she trusts him enough to know that sometimes his maverick and unconventional approach is necessary against the shadowy foes faced in today's world, as she mentions during the committee hearing after the loss of a very important disc containing information about various agents in Skyfall. At the end of Skyfall, a wound from a stray bullet ultimately claims the life of Olivia Mansfield. However, stepping into the role is Gareth Mallory, a retired SAS lieutenant colonel who appears to be a typical obstructive bureaucrat at first, and may even seem a bit suspicious, but is willing to bend a few rules and adapt to the unconventional approach Mansfield often took. Mallory is played by Ralph Fiennes, who has established a very impressive film career spanning 30 years. Like a number of British actors, he trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and it's worth noting his family has a fair amount of involvement in films as well. He's often worked alongside family members. His first notable role was as concentration camp commander Amon Girth in Schindler's List, a role which left quite an impact as it required a major meditation on what the nature of evil is in order to perform the role properly. He's had a number of famous roles across different styles of films, be they romantic comedies, serious dramas, or thrillers. These have included serial killer Francis Dolarhyde in Red Dragon, Justin Quayle in The Constant Gardener, and of course Voldemort in the Harry Potter films. He has also performed notable work in theatre and has done charity work for UNICEF and the Constant Gardener Trust, supporting impoverished children in Kenya. Fiennes established it after working on the film of the same name. As a leader, Mallory won't hesitate to call out those who step out of line, only coming down hard on Mansfield because she did honestly screw up. At the start of Spectre, he's similarly harsh on Bond for justified reasons. However, he's very good at abusing loopholes and will teach his personnel how to get around difficult situations. He's also the most physically capable M and knows full well what the job entails. He confirms a running theme throughout the series that the license to kill is given to those who are well aware of when not to pull the trigger and fully understand the responsibility of taking a life. Unfortunately, he too has his secret, and it's perhaps the most catastrophic of all. The unrestrained and as yet uncontrollable Heracles project, with its sophisticated viral nanobots capable of targeting either extremely specific or broad-reaching DNA combinations. This spells disaster throughout No Time to Die. It doesn't seem to have any immediate consequences for him besides those shown in the events of the film, but Mallory does realise he's screwed up badly, especially when even Bond calls him out on it. Whether Fiennes will return as M in the next Bond film remains to be seen, but we certainly get much better development of his M, a mix of Bernard-Lee and Judi Dench in many ways. Next, we move on to Moneypenny, and her role has unfortunately never been particularly big. She mostly provides a little bit of extra information along the way and flirts with Bond for a while after he receives his mission briefing. Moneypenny is something of a constant for Bond, a reliable companion and ally who has helped him out on a number of occasions. She is the one who ultimately mediates behind the scenes when Bond threatens to leave MI6 in the wake of Operation Bedlam's suspension on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Both Bond and M are incredibly grateful for her. There is much more of a mutual attraction during the Connery and Lazenby era, with plenty of casual flirting involved. When Roger Moore took over, however, the relationship became a bit more platonic. This is perhaps due to Roger Moore and Lois Maxwell actually being good friends in real life, so the relationship does feel like two old friends having a bit of fun. Lois Maxwell portrayed the character in 14 films, having been there from the very start and seeing 3 Bonds come and go. She had a very distinct grace and charm to her, with plenty of acting skill as well. She studied at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art alongside Roger Moore, and also appeared in The Saint and The Persuaders, both TV series starring Moore, so their relationship is definitely quite strong. There are plenty of interesting little details which show themselves where Maxwell's Moneypenny is concerned. She's the only incarnation to actually be a Royal Navy officer for one, and seems just as good as Bond is at throwing a hat onto the hat stand in M's office area. No word on how she stacks up compared to Oddjob. Caroline Bliss's tenure as Moneypenny lasted only 2 films, but it's clear her version of the character has a fairly big crush on Bond that isn't necessarily reciprocated. Her concern for him is demonstrated very well in License to Kill. While she never interacts with Bond in that film, she is extremely worried about him and goes behind M's back to ensure Bond has backup, as she is the one who sends Q out to help him. She would not reprise the role after License to Kill, with the appropriately named Samantha Bond taking over for Goldeneye. While she is a bit cooler towards Bond in that film, perhaps due to the film's subtle deconstructions of the Bond universe, she is back to the familiar flirting from Tomorrow Never Dies onwards. She also shows more of a social life, having dates with other men from time to time, but as her use of Q's virtual reality system shows at the end of Die Another Day, she still dreams of 007. When Moneypenny returned in Skyfall, we didn't quite know it was Moneypenny for most of the film. We are introduced to a fellow field agent named Eve at the beginning of the film, played by Naomi Harris, who inadvertently shoots Bond during the pursuit of Patrice, allowing the important information to get away, and is quite distraught about the situation. However, she teams up with him during the investigation into Silver's operations, and the two share a few light-hearted jokes about the situation. It's very clear Bond doesn't hold any grudges. Bond also appears to have a very genuine respect for her as well, and offers sincere compliments on her looks and fashion sense, as opposed to the usual flirting. While Eve is very capable, she has largely been suspended from fieldwork and decides to take up the role as Gareth Mallory's secretary. Only then do we learn her surname is Moneypenny. She proves particularly capable, not being just a secretary. She assists Mallory in countering the schemes of the traitorous Max Denby throughout Spectre, and certainly helps Bond out along the way on a number of occasions. However, there's not a lot of flirting between the two of them, and Bond seems a little surprised to note she has such a busy social life. His own life and apartment seem very sparse by comparison. Though there's no romantic connection, they're still good friends and work very well together. While Peter Burton took the role in Dr. No, and John Cleese had it in Die Another Day and to a degree in The World Is Not Enough, mention the MI6 quartermaster and Desmond Llewellyn will be first and foremost in everyone's mind. Almost coming across as a weary schoolmaster dealing with a brilliant but troublemaking student, Q provided countless creative gadgets and stylish cars to 007 across 17 films. Llewellyn was not featured in Live and Let Die, but otherwise played Q, starting with From Russia with Love and continuing on to The World Is Not Enough. Llewellyn had a fairly unremarkable film career, mostly roles as uncredited extras, with a hiatus of 5 years during World War II. He served with the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, which interestingly uses an archaic spelling of Welsh with a CH, but he was captured in 1940 and held as a prisoner of war until the liberation of Colditz. He was also a fairly good sportsman, having played rugby for Newport and cricket with Malpas Cricket Club. He wears the tie of the latter in Octopussy and the former in The Living Daylights. Securing his fame with the role of Q, a master of gadgets and technology, was a little ironic as Llewellyn admitted he was hopeless with technology. It didn't help that Roger Moore tended to rewrite his dialogue to make it as technical as possible. Q constantly bemoans the fact that Bond tends to destroy just about every gadget he gets his hands on, not to mention the disasters which have befallen many of his cars. Though, to be fair, the Lotus's fate in For Your Eyes Only wasn't really Bond's fault. The explosive burglar alarm isn't the best idea. But Q is generally willing to place his trust in Bond. He knows full well how good Bond is, and Bond is in turn extremely grateful to Q. There isn't quite as much of this during the Connery films. They tend to be a little bit antagonistic at times because of Bond's destructive nature towards his gadgets, but the relationship picks up from Lazenby onwards. The two of them tend to exchange plenty of banter while still showing a lot of respect, especially as time goes on, and Bond even admits Q would have been an excellent field agent during License to Kill. Though that film also shows Q throwing away one of his own gadgets, perhaps in a nice acknowledgement that he really would be a field agent as good as Bond. In the Daniel Craig continuity, Q returned at the same time as Moneypenny, with a younger and much more tech-savvy style in-universe in the form of Ben Whishaw, who ultimately admitted he too was a bit hopeless with technology. The snark and sarcasm is certainly there from the beginning. The exchange between Bond and Q during their first meeting is kind of a verbal skill test, but the two seem to earn the other's respect during the bout. Wishaw's Q initially seems a bit cocky and convinced of technology's superiority, but his encounters with Silver's own technology leaves him a bit more humble and cautious. He still bemoans Bond's tendency to destroy everything he gets his hands on, but an interesting distinction is that he doesn't show the same stoicism as Llewellyn's Q. His awkward laughter at his own joke about Bond bringing back one piece of his car instead of bringing it back in one piece makes a good contrast to the seriousness with which Llewellyn's own one-liners tended to be delivered. For all that though, he still cares a lot about Bond. While the two do clash a bit, especially in No Time to Die when Bond and Moneypenny interrupt his date preparations, he does his best to help Bond all throughout. Bill Tanner has returned in the films as well, but first appeared in The Man with the Golden Gun, played by Michael Goodliffe but not having a significant role. In For Your Eyes Only, he effectively took the role of M due to Bernard Lee's death. James Villiers portrayed Tanner here. Afterwards, the role was taken by Michael Kitchen during some of the Brosnan films, and the friendship that Bond and Tanner had is much clearer there. Kitchen's Tanner is at first not convinced that Judi Dench's M will be a sufficiently capable leader. He derisively refers to her accountancy background by nicknaming her the evil Queen of Numbers, only for Bond to point out she's right behind him. While Tanner doesn't necessarily have a huge role, he still offers plenty of support. Quantum of Solace once more sees Tanner return, played by Rory Kinnear. This time around, Tanner and Bond seem to have an even deeper friendship and discuss matters such as Denby's schemes and the changing world of intelligence during Spectre. It's at least clear that they are good friends, but there has never really been a lot of time for Bond and Tanner to show that friendship in the majority of the films. It's kind of unfortunate, but it seems that Bond's friends don't always get a lot of time in the limelight. During Tomorrow Never Dies, Michael Kitchen was unavailable, so Colin Salmon stepped into the void as Charles Robinson, an aide to M who assists her in giving Bond mission briefings, in addition to providing support on missions. There is a fairly notable friendship between the two as well, since Robinson is a stand-in for Tanner. Interestingly, Bond calls Robinson by his first name but seems to use Tanner's surname most of the time. Perhaps it's a mark of respect for Tanner's position as Chief of Staff. Regardless, Robinson remained part of the MI6 staff until the end of Brosnan's tenure, being the only non-white recurring character until Daniel Craig's films. Up until the return of David Hedison in License to Kill, Felix Leiter was always recast. There is no confirmation as to why this happened. Some sources claim the producers did not want to risk anyone upstaging Bond, but contract disputes may also have played a part. The approach to playing Felix has also differed quite a lot, as you might expect, because Varying actors in the role will have their own take, and whether these work or not remains subject to opinion. Consensus seems to be that David Hedison's version was the best loved by audiences until the Craig era, where Jeffrey Wright cemented the role. The first time Felix appears on screen is in Dr. No, where it's revealed Quarrel and Pussfella, the owner of a Kingston bar who earned his nickname after wrestling a large octopus while fishing, are assisting him in his own operations regarding Crab Key. Leiter doesn't get to do a great deal in this film, which feels like a bit of a waste. He does seem like an American version of Bond, having plenty of style and presumably a good deal of skill, but otherwise he's a fairly minor presence. Two interesting points stand out. Felix didn't appear in the novel Dr. No, and in this film he's played by Jack Lord. Now there's an idea, James Bond and Steve McGarrett teaming up. Cease Linda's version of Felix seems older than Bond, but has a fairly active role in assisting with Bond's investigation of Goldfinger's operations. He is able to keep an eye on Bond's supposed infiltration of Goldfinger's stud farm in Kentucky, but Goldfinger is savvy enough to make it look like Bond is faring better than he actually is. Felix does help set up the climax of the film, having received Bond's vital warning about Operation Grand Slam and prepared a trap. While he takes no part in the action, he's nonetheless fairly helpful. He does have a larger role than in the book, where, while he's mentioned when Bond tries to get information out, he only appears right at the end with a specially modified bazooka. Felix gets his third actor in as many appearances when Rick Van Nussen plays the role in Thunderball. Felix is fairly helpful and assists Bond over the course of his investigation, aiding him in finding the downed Vulcan bomber and providing covering fire which keeps sharks away from Bond. Even though he is investigating Spectre as a result of the USA being threatened, his role doesn't quite feel as big as it does in the novel Thunderball. Nonetheless, he remains fairly useful and feels like a continuation of Jack Lord's version of Felix. He's a skilled fellow agent with sharp dress sense, but Bond takes the limelight. For Felix's fourth appearance in Diamonds Are Forever, Norman Burton is the actor in the role. His version of the character seems far removed from the Felix we have seen earlier. He's a fair bit grouchier for one and is probably meant to look a bit older and stockier than Bond. Though to be fair, Connery wasn't in the best form either in this film. While Bond does, amusingly enough, note Felix can fix anything when talking with Tiffany Case, this version of Felix doesn't seem to be too well remembered, given he frequently comes across as rather irritated with Bond and doesn't do a lot to help out. David Hedison's turn as Felix in Live and Let Die was well regarded. He feels like a genuine friend to Bond, and while he winds up in a few difficult situations because of that, such as being stuck trying to placate a frustrated flight school owner after Bond has got his hands on a plane, he is very helpful and shows a good chemistry with Roger Moore. His investigations into Kananga's operations give Bond some useful leads along the way, and it's pretty clear he's obviously got his own gadgets here and there, since a microphone hidden in a cigarette lighter in a car proves very useful for communication. Bond refers to it as a genuine Felix lighter. Terrible pun. After Live and Let Die, Felix took a break for a few films, and his next incarnation was in The Living Daylights. Again, he doesn't appear in that particular short story, and they missed out a few occasions where he could have appeared. John Terry takes the role, but doesn't get a great deal to do. He gets to hear Bond's explanation about the scheme he has cooked up involving the fake assassination of General Pushkin, and assists Bond in infiltrating Brad Whitaker's compound, and that's kind of it. Interestingly, Felix does appear in the novel The Man with the Golden Gun, but doesn't appear in the movie. License to Kill adapted certain parts of the novel Live and Let Die, and due to the role Felix plays in the film, a familiar presence was needed because audiences would relate to a Felix they'd seen before. David Hedison returned as a result. The friendship between Felix and Bond is even more clear, as Bond manages to assist Felix in his mission of capturing drug lord Franz Sanchez, and still manages to fulfill his best man role of getting him to the church on time for his wedding, or at least not too late anyway. The strength of their friendship, coupled with the horrifying fate inflicted on Felix and Della on their wedding night, are the catalyst for Bond's furious revenge mission against Sanchez. As a bit of karma, it's Felix's gift to Bond that ultimately seals Sanchez's fate. Felix didn't show up in the Brosnan films, with the lighter style role being filled by Jack Wade in Goldeneye and Tomorrow Never Dies. Wade isn't too impressed with the classic spycraft, being a fairly brash, bold and slightly crude fellow in contrast to the measure of sophistication Felix held. Nevertheless, he is a hospitable and helpful fellow once you get to know him. He's been married 3 times, is apparently interested in gardening, and drives a battered Zaporozhek, which is maintained by use of a sledgehammer, at least from what we see in Goldeneye. He comes across as a bit of a touristy sort and maybe a bit of a cowboy, given he's often shown in a cowboy hat, and he has a tendency to wear Hawaiian shirts, perhaps being as deliberate a contrast to Felix and Bond as possible. On greeting Bond in Tomorrow Never Dies, Wade is wearing a Hawaiian shirt with dinosaurs on it. Nonetheless, he does come through in a pinch when his assistance is needed, even if it's slightly late as we see in the end of Goldeneye. Felix would return in the Daniel Craig continuity in Casino Royale, played by Jeffrey Wright. Though it must be said he's not the first black incarnation of the character. We shall discuss his role later, but former pro footballer Bernie Casey played a much more active Felix in Never Say Never Again, so that should be an interesting lesson. Felix plays a similar role to his duty in the novel Casino Royale, only this time he's actually part of Le Chiffre's poker game on a CIA mission, and agrees to help Bond out because Felix himself is losing pretty badly and he figures Bond can beat Le Chiffre. He arranges for the 2 agencies to team up in order to bring Le Chiffre in. While they do wind up defeating him, unfortunately they don't quite get their man. During Quantum of Solace, Felix does initially turn a blind eye to the CIA's dealings with Dominic Green at first, since there's a very big deal involving America getting oil, which probably fairly typical for America. But he is smart enough to know that Bond is onto something as a result of his investigations into Dominic Green and his organisation. Subsequently, Felix doesn't actively try to stop Bond, unlike his particularly shady colleague Greg Beam, and provides what help he can under the circumstances because he trusts Bond enough to know that if Bond is investigating this guy, something must be up. That level of trust does indicate that they've built a very good friendship. While Felix doesn't appear in Skyfall, which is fair enough since it focuses on MI6 and is only mentioned in Spectre as someone who can help Lucia Sciarra, he returns to try and recruit Bond for a mission in Cuba in the events of No Time to Die. Namely, the investigation into Spectre, which ultimately sees Bond teaming up with the young but capable Paloma, which nicely reunites Daniel Craig and Ana de Armas after the film Knives Out. The duo's friendship is seen as extremely strong in this film, but unfortunately, on this occasion it's ultimately broken when Felix is shot and mortally wounded by the traitorous Logan Ash. While Bond tries to save him, Felix sadly dies from his wound and goes down with the sinking boat Bond is trying to escape. Somewhat poetically but very sadly, Felix sinking beneath the waves mirrors Vesper drowning in Casino Royale. Later on, when Bond encounters and wounds Ash while attempting to protect Madeline and Matilda from Liuzza for Safin's men, Ash begs Bond to save him from being crushed by a precariously positioned car, stupidly asking Bond to help a brother out. Bond bitterly responds, "I had a brother, his name was Felix Leiter," and avenges his closest friend, crushing Ash beneath the car. The last of Bond's main recurring allies in the film continuity is Rene Mathis, who played much the same role in the movie Casino Royale as he did in the novel. However, the movie notes this as their first meeting, rather than having a connection from prior missions. Mathis also has a few tricks up his sleeve. When Bond kills terrorist leader Stephen Urbano and his lackey during the events of the film, since they are trying to kill Le Chiffre for losing their money, Mathis puts their bodies in the trunk of a car belonging to Le Chiffre's ally, taking one problem out of the way. Unfortunately for Mathis, there is one major difference. Thanks to Le Chiffre, Bond believes Mathis is the double agent who betrayed him and has him arrested. In Quantum of Solace, Mathis has been cleared and given a comfortable retirement by MI6. While he does ultimately agree to assist Bond in his investigation/revenge mission against Dominic Green, Mathis unfortunately isn't a good judge of character, not knowing that his contact Carlos is a corrupt police chief working for Green's LA General Medrano. He's brutally beaten by Carlos's men and left for Bond to find. As Mathis dies, he tries to get Bond to forgive Vesper for her betrayal, ultimately succumbing to his injuries. Once more displaying his hatred of losing people, Bond emphatically exacts revenge for Mathis' death, shooting Carlos in the head. It's very telling that Bond is so protective of anyone considered his friend. In a dangerous job like his, rife with psychological and physical scarring, it can be very hard to keep people in his life, as that very sparse apartment of his shows. As a result, the people Bond can count on as allies and friends are extremely valuable, and the fact many people do return to give him a helping hand is all the more important. Okay, I think that's enough wasting time. We've shown off a few little tricks along the way. The cheat we got, as you probably saw with me waving my controller around, is Tiny Bond, which makes us small. I demonstrated a trick that allows Tiny Bond to float above stairs, somehow, and we also got to see the scientists with guns trick on top of that. So, all in all, that's not too bad. Now, that was kind of I was just going for it, and yeah, I kind of had to get padding because the two surface levels are actually very easy if your memory holds up and you know where to go. I sort of forgot what I was doing on Agent, but once I remembered you needed the comms room key, because, you know, this time they actually decided to lock it just in case somebody wandered in, we got there in the end. And it was pretty easy just to do the cheat first time. The reason this one I think is actually quite easy to do, and Tiny Bond is just sort of a goof around cheat that doesn't really do very much for you. It's certainly funny, it makes you a lot smaller, enemies will still aim for you, which is a bit of a nuisance. They can't shoot over your head like bloody Oddjob. But yeah, both surface levels are really, really easy to work with because you've got so much space to run. And in Surface 2, even on 00 Agent, you're not going to run into that many guys with KF-7 Soviets. It's just the Clop, which sucks in your hands and sucks in the enemy's hands. What on earth did Ken Lobb do to get that named after him? Probably kicked somebody's dog repeatedly for several weeks. Anyway, that wraps things up for this episode of Goldeneye and the lesson. Hopefully it went long enough. Hopefully we got some good information out of it. Next time we are going into the bunker, which has had quite a refurbishment. It's going to be a bit of a hectic mission, but we can complete a cheat on Agent. Got some pretty tough ones coming up and a fairly long mission coming along too. Well, a couple of fairly long ones anyway. Thank you very much for joining me. Till next time, this is Red 2, returning to base.